Every Friday evening, just before dusk and disappeared beneath the Atlantic, a young woman walked alone toward the old lighthouse at the edge of Harvey's End. Her name was Emma. Harvey's End was the kind of small coastal town where everyone knew everyone. The fisherman knew whose boat was coming back before it appeared on the horizon. Se bake on en WHO, like cinnamon rolls en WHO, Prophet blueberry muffins, and when someone bought a new car. The whole town somehow knew about it before dinner. So, naturally, everyone knew about Emma. They knew that every Friday, without exception, she walked the same narrow path toward the lighthouse. She always arrived down 6:30. She always carried a small canvas bag, and she always ate on the same weathered wooden bench facing the sea. For years, people had wondered why. Some believed she was waiting for a sailor who had never eaten. Others whispered that she was waiting for an old boyfriend who had left town. A few at the old fisherman said she was keeping a promise made long ago, but nobody actually knew. Emma never explained. She simply came. That Friday evening, the sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gray. Waves rolled gently against the rocks below the lighthouse, and the wind carried the salty smell of the ocean through the town. Emma reached the bench, brushed away a few grains of sand, and sat down. From her canvas bag, she pulled out a small silver Emma sent to paper cups. She poured coffee into both. Then she placed one cup beside her. The second cup remained untouched. Emma looked toward the horizon. "I'm here," she whispered. No one was there to hear her. At least, that was what everyone believed. Across the road, an elderly fisherman named Samuel watched from his truck. I had seen Emma come here for almost 15 years. One Friday, unable to keep his curiosity any longer, he finally approached her. "Emma," he said gently, "may I ask you something?" She smiled. "You've been asking yourself the same question for 15 years, Samuel." The old man chuckled softly. "Then perhaps you already know what I'm going to ask." The next Friday, the weather was colder. A thick layer of clouds covered the sky, and the ocean looked darker than usual. The lighthouse stood quietly above the cliffs, its white walls fading into the gray evening. Emma arrived at the same time, 6:30. She carried the same canvas bag, and, as always, 2 cups. This time, Samuel was waiting for her. He stood beside the wooden bench, holding his old fishing head against the wind. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. Emma gave him a small smile. "I know." They sat together without speaking for a while. Below them, the words moved slowly through the racks. Finally, Samuel looked at the folded letter in Emma's hands. "Was that really the last thing your father left you?" Emma nodded. "Yes, punto. Have you ever read it aloud?" She shook her head. "Not even once? Neo punto." "Why?" Emma looked toward the lighthouse. "Because he was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That the words would change when he had them." Samuel didn't understand. Emma gently opened the letter. "The paper has become fragile," she said, "but I still remember every word." She took a slow breath. "My father wrote this the night before his final trip." Samuel remained silent. Emma began reading. "My little Emma, if you are reading this, it means he wasn't able to keep my promise to come home. I'm sorry. I know you will be angry with me. You may even believe it shows that she obey you. Please don't ever believe that. Ceci has always been my wife, but you have always been my home. If you don't return, I want you to remember something. People sometimes think a lighthouse exists to bring ships home, but that's not exactly true. A lighthouse cannot control the sea. It cannot stop a storm. It cannot make a lost ship turn around. It can only keep shining. And sometimes, that's enough. So, Emma, if life ever becomes dark, don't wait for someone else to save you. Be your own light. And if you ever miss me, come to the lighthouse. I will be there in every light you see." Emma stopped reading. Her eyes were filled with tears. Samuel looked away toward the ocean. "What happened that night?" he finally asked. Emma folded the letter carefully. "My father was a fisherman. I know. There was a storm." Samuel nodded slowly. "Everyone in town remembers." Emma looked at the water. It wasn't supposed to go up. The storm warning had already been issued, but another fishing boat had engine trouble. The lighthouse door had not been opened in years. Its blue paint was peeling, and dust had gathered down the old brass handle. Emma stood in front of it with a small wooden box in her hand. For a moment, she couldn't move. Samuel stood beside her. "You're sure?" he asked. Emma nodded. "I've been waiting 15 years." She opened the box and took out the tiny brass key. It slipped into the lock perfectly. Click. The door opened with a long, tired creak. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of salt, dust, and old wood. A narrow spiral staircase climbed into darkness. Emma turned on her flashlight. The beam moved across faded walls covered with old photographs, handwritten notes, and names of sailors who had once worked there. Samuel followed quietly. "You know," he said, "I haven't been inside since he was a boy." Emma smiled faintly. "My father used to bring me here." "Your father worked here?" "Sometimes. He helped to keep it during storms." They climbed slowly. Halfway up, Emma stopped. There was a small mark carved into the wooden wall. A heart, and inside it were 2 letters. "I must de." Emma touched the carving. "E for Emma," she whispered. Samuel looked at her. And Emma smiled through a tear. Daniel. Your father's name. She nodded. I made this when he was 6. They continued climbing. At the top, they reached a small room beneath the lighthouse lamp. The room was almost empty. There was an old wooden desk, a broken chair, and a dusty metal cabinet. Emma's heart began beating fast. She walked toward the cabinet. On its front was a tiny brass lock, the same shape as the key. Her hands trembled. She inserted the key. Click. The cabinet opened. Inside was a small wooden suitcase. Emma stared at it. Her father's name was written across the lid. Daniel Carter. She carefully lifted the suitcase onto the desk. Samuel stood behind her. Open it, I whispered. Emma slowly unclasped the metal locks. Inside the photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of fishing boats, storms, the lighthouse, and harvesting. Then Emma found something that made her stop breathing. A photograph of herself. She was 8 years old, standing beside her father on the lighthouse steps. She was holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. On the back, Daniel had written, "My little light." Emma pressed the photograph against her chest. "I remember this day." Samuel smiled sadly. For several seconds, Emma and Samuel stood completely still. The lighthouse had gone silent. No wind, no footsteps, only the distant sound of waves striking the rocks below. "Samuel," Emma whispered, "I am here." It turned his flashlight, but the weak beam barely reached across the room. Emma looked at the metal container beneath the floorboard. "Help me with this." Samuel knelt beside her. Together, they lifted the small container onto the desk. It was heavier than Emma expected. There was no lock, only a narrow metal clasp. Emma opened it. Inside was a collection of things wrapped carefully in an old wool blanket. The first thing she saw was a pocket watch. She recognized it immediately. Her father had worn it every day. Emma picked it up with trembling hands. The glass was cracked. The hands had stopped at las 11:47. She remembered that time. It was the last time anyone in Harvey's had seen her father alive. Beneath the watch was another photograph. This one showed Daniel standing beside a young woman Emma had never seen before. The woman was holding a baby. On the back of the photograph were 3 words. "Her name is Grace." Emma stared at it. "WHO is Grace?" Samuel looked at the photograph. "I don't know." Under the picture was a handwritten note. Emma opened it. Grace was trapped on the north side of the island during the storm. She had her infant daughter with her. I promised her husband it would bring them home. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her father hadn't gone into the storm simply because another fishing boat was in trouble. There had been a mother and child trapped on the island. I had gone back for them. She continued reading. "I found them near the old sea caves. The baby was cold but alive. Grace could barely walk. I carried the child and helped race toward the rescue boat. The storm was getting worse. I knew I might not make it back, so I gave the child to Samuel's crew and stayed behind to help Grace reach the shore. If I don't return, please make sure they know it right." Emma stopped. "Samuel," the old fisherman was crying. "I never knew," I whispered. Emma looked at the photograph again. Then she noticed something. The baby in Grace's arms was wrapped in a tiny knitted blanket. Emma knew that blanket. She had seen it before. She had seen it in an old photograph of herself. Her father had once told her that the blanket had belonged to a baby who was rescued during the storm. Emma's voice trembled. "Where are Grace and her daughter now?" Samuel shook his head. "I don't know." Emma searched through the container. There was one final envelope. This one had a different name on it. "Grace Miller." Inside was a short letter. "Grace, if you and your daughter survive, please take her to Harvey's. There is a woman here who will help you. Her name is Margaret Carter. She is my wife. Tell her I love her. Tell her Emma was the greatest." The next morning, Harvey's woke beneath a pale blue sky. For the first time in years, Emma did not walk toward the lighthouse. Instead, she stood beside Samuel's old truck, holding her father's photograph in both hands. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. The dress Daniel had left behind belonged to a quiet little house in a neighboring coastal town. It stood at the end of a narrow road, surrounded by tall grass and white wooden fences. When they finally arrived, Emma noticed something hanging beside the front door. A small brass lighthouse. Her heart skipped. Samuel parked the truck. "You ready?" Emma looked at the house. "Ene punto." Samuel smiled gently. "That's probably okay." Emma walked to the door and knocked. Nothing happened. She knocked again. After a few seconds, footsteps approached. The door opened. An elderly woman stood there. Her silver hair was pulled back loosely, and she wore a pale blue sweater. She looked at Emma, then at Samuel. Then her eyes fell on the photograph in Emma's hand. The woman's face changed. She reached for the door frame. "Daniel." Emma could barely breathe. "You know my father." The woman stared at her for a long moment. Then tears filled her eyes. "You're his daughter." Emma nodded. "My name is Emma." The woman covered her mouth. "I've been waiting for this day for 40 years. Emma froze. 40? The woman stepped aside. "Please come in." Her name was Grace Miller. The same name written on the envelope. Inside the house, everything felt warm and peaceful. Family photographs covered the walls. Emma walked slowly through the room. room. Then she saw a photograph that made her stop. A young Grace was standing beside a teenage girl. The girl had dark hair and familiares. Emma stared. "WH, is she?" Grace looked at the photograph. "My daughter." Emma's voice became almost a whisper. "Her name?" Grace smiled sadly. "Anenia. Emma felt something inside her shift. "Where is she?" Grace looked toward the window. "She lives across the country now." Then she paused. "But before you ask anything else, there is something you should know." Emma sat down. Grace joined her. "The night of the storm, your father saved my life." She told them everything. Daniel had found Grace and her infant daughter trapped near the sea caves. The rescue boat had arrived, but the waves were too dangerous. Daniel carried the baby through the water first. Then he returned for Grace. He got her close enough to the rescue boat, but another wave struck. Daniel disappeared. Grace had survived. Her daughter had survived, but Daniel had never been found. "I spent years believing you owed your father my life," Grace said. Emma wiped away a tear. But there was something else. Grace walked to a small cabinet. She opened it and removed the wooden box. Inside was a child's drawing. Emma recognized the handwriting immediately. Her father's handwriting. Grace handed it to her. Emma didn't open the final letter that night. She carried it home and placed it on the small table beside her bed. For hours, she simply stared at her father's handwriting. She had spent 15 years wondering what his last words might have been. Now they were sitting only inches away. But some truths are difficult to face, even when you've spent your whole life searching for them. The next morning, Emma returned to the lighthouse alone. The ocean was calm. The same place that had once felt lonely now seemed strangely peaceful. She climbed the spiral stairs and entered the little room beneath the great lamp. Then she opened the envelope. "My little light, if you are reading this, you are older than the little girl I remember. Perhaps you have children of your own. Perhaps you have already forgotten the sound of my voice. That's okay. People change. Let's move forward. But I hope you never forget one thing. You well up, more than you will ever understand. I know you may spend years asking why you didn't come home. Please don't. I wanted to come home. Every part of me wanted to. But that night, there were people who needed me, and they couldn't turn away. I learned something during my years at sea. A lighthouse doesn't shine because it knows who will see its light. It shines because someone might need it. So if you ever find yourself standing in the darkness, remember me. Don't wait for someone to come and rescue you. Don't spend your life looking toward the sea for what has already disappeared. Turn out, look for the light, and when you find it, become that light for someone else. That is how love survives, not by keeping people beside us forever, but by carrying what they gave us into the lives of others. If you come here every Friday, I hope one day you stop waiting for me. I hope you come because you had someone else to guide on me. I love you, Emma, always. De punto. Emma read the final line 3 times. Then she closed her eyes. For 15 years, she had sat on that bench with 2 cups of coffee. One for herself, one for her father. But now she understood. The second cup had never really been for him. It had been for the part of herself that had refused to let go. Emma wiped her tears, then she walked downstairs. Outside, Samuel was waiting. I didn't ask what the letter said. I simply stood beside her. Emma looked at the ocean. My father wasn't waiting for the right moment to come on me, she said. Samuel nodded. I was trying to make sure someone else could. Emma smiled. That Friday evening, she returned to the lighthouse one final time. But something was different. She brought only 1 cup of coffee. She sat on the wooden bench and watched the sun sink into the Atlantic. A little girl from town walked past with her mother. The child stopped and stared at the lighthouse. "Mommy," she asked, "does the lighthouse keep ships from getting lost?" Emma smiled. Her mother answered, "It helps them find their way." The little girl looked at Emma. "Do you live here?" Emma laughed softly. "Eneo punto. Then why do you come every Friday?" Emma looked toward the glowing lighthouse. "Because someone. I love taught me that even a small light can help someone find their way on me." The girl smiled and ran after her mother. Emma stayed on the bench until the first stars appeared. Then she stood. She picked up her empty cup. And for the first time in 15 years, she walked away without looking back. But she didn't leave the lighthouse behind. She carried its light with her. Years later, people in Harvest End would tell stories about Emma. They would say she helped struggling fishermen. They would say she brought meals to lonely neighbors. They would say that whenever someone in town felt lost, Emma was somehow the first person to arrive. And every Friday evening, just before sunset, she still returned to the lighthouse. But she no longer came to wait. She came to remember. Sometimes she brought someone who needed hope. Sometimes she brought a child who was afraid of the dark. Sometimes she simply sat quietly and watched the ocean. And beside her, there was always one empty place on the bench. Not because she was expecting someone to return, but because she had finally learned what her father had wanted her to understand. El obedecen te disappear when someone is gone. Sometimes it becomes a light you carry, a light you share, a light that quietly tells someone, somewhere in the darkness, you are not alone, and there will always be a way home.